Okay, been a while since I've done one of these, so let's get back into it. I'm going to do something a little different this month. So I've done a couple videos on the same artists, different albums of theirs in this series, but mainly kept it spread out to different artists. This month is different. This month I want to dedicate to one of my new favourite bands that I've discovered. A band so horrendously underrated in their time and even today, in just their legacy, but just sort of their perfection in songwriting and composition, along with just the utterly unique sound of theirs. So this is a month dedicated to King's X. Starting off with probably their most celebrated seminal album, 1989's Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. So King's X were formed in the late 70s, however, they didn't actually start releasing music under the name King's X until the late 80s, and they're often considered one of the main figures in pioneering progressive metal. However, their style of progressive metal is not the same as perhaps you may hear in, say, Dream Theater or even Tool, although they certainly have had their influences throughout the alternative music scene throughout the 90s and onwards. King's X's sound is defined by a combination of the hard rock of the 70s and 80s combined with gospel, blues, funk and psychedelia, often featuring super tight vocal harmonies between the three members and these intricate and yet super catchy riffs and compositions. And none better really exemplify this than probably their second album, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. This features a lot of the band's early hallmarks, but just perfected. They hit the scene with Out of the Silent Planet the previous year in 1988 with this hard rock, heavy metal leaning sound with, it's distinctly 80s, but you can tell this is an album from the 80s, but just with an extra edge of something that you just, it's hard to put your finger on because you just sort of, there was nothing like them at the time. And with Gretchen, they basically perfected that sound. The super jangly guitar tones of Ty Tabor mixed with his more straightforwardly heavy riffs, along with the absolutely crushing bass tone of Doug Pinnick and the drumming percussion work of Jerry Gaskill, and all three of them, their vocal harmonies combining into one to create these just immense layers to really, I mean, they're just like most power trios, the best power trios ever. They're just more than the sum of their parts. They're just the three members, but they just sound like so much more. Coincidentally, King's X were one of the first bands to really experiment with drop D tuning, a staple of 90s and onwards alternative rock and the such. And it is really interesting when like you're combining the sort of jangly, psychedelic 80s rock style guitar playing with the chunky, typical, low power chord, drop tune chords with some of the riffs. And it's that juxtaposition that really often, it just makes them so distinct. You hear them and you know it's them. And of course, they were a big major influence on grunge. I think it was Jeff Ament of Pearl Jam and Green River fame, who referred to King's X as like the godfathers of grunge, or the proto-genitors of grunge, basically, because they're certainly that influence that you can definitely hear was sort of fed into some of those bands. But anyway, enough waffling and preamble, let's actually get into the album itself. Starting out with track 1, Out of the Silent Planet. Sharing the title of their previous record, you start off with this swell of noise, and then you get this massive chiming bass tone. On this album, Doug Pinnick was actually using a 12-string bass, which just the coolest things ever. Probably was also a big influence on Jeff Ament, hence why he uses a 12-string on some Pearl Jam tracks, typically Jeremy. And it's just got this massive, again, this strong chimey sound, kind of almost like a church organ in a way, which I actually found out that's why church organs sound like that, 'cause it's just stacked layers of octaves, basically. It's a music theory nerd bit there in for you. But then it comes in, and again, Ty Tabor with his distinctly, you know, groovy, punchy, but still quite sort of jangly riffs in a way. I know I'm using that word a lot, but that really is, early King's X has that really distinct sound that I can't describe it in any other way. It's just very jangly. And again, with just these layered vocal harmonies, and Doug and Ty both trading lead vocal duties on this track, it really sets the tone of what this band really is going for, with this just realised sound that again is just so distinctly them. Funny thing as well, Doug Pinnick is a left-handed bass player, like myself. And considering this was the 1980s, getting a left-handed 12-string bass, he must have had that custom ordered in like somewhere, because finding a lefty 12-string bass even now is just like, it's insane. So lucky him. But then track 2, Over My Head, probably one of their most well-known tracks. It's fun, it's groovy, and really leaning into their gospel influences. So one thing I will add here is that King's X often got lumped in as a Christian rock band, because a lot of their songs, especially in the early days, have strong Christian themes, or the band members were, at least at the time, quite heavily Christian. They rejected the label of Christian rock, and there is certainly elements of their back catalogue and certain songs on this album that do criticise certain aspects of Christianity, which we'll get onto in a moment. But I will say, if all Christian music was this good, I wouldn't be an atheist. Let's just say that much. So yeah, the lyrics of Over My Head, but it's just that perfectly groovy aspect to it, that, you know, distinctly sort of late 80s rock sound, but with that little edge of that funk and that, you know, sort of je ne sais quoi that King's X have, that separate them from a lot of their contemporaries, with often, you know, it's these riffs that just have these little lead lines in them, and clearly a lot of Hendrix influence. There's a lot of Hendrix chords in this song. You can definitely tell that's a strong influence on Ty's playing. But again, the layers, vocal harmonies, Doug's just super punchy bass tone on this. So it's one of the main distinct aspects of King's X's sound. The bass tones are some of the most massive, heavy, punchy tones you will ever hear in any, you know, hard rock or heavy metal ever. It's like, I mean, yeah, sure, today you have your dark glass kind of stuff and whatever, but considering this was, you know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it sounds like just tearing metal sheets apart. So that's what it sounds like. It's just so good. And following that, we have the track Summerland, starting off with this more kind of, again, that distinctly clean, jangly, arpeggiated guitar chord riffs that Ty was utilising very well on this album. And it's just this beautifully sublime track. Again, the layers, the vocal harmonies, that just such a dense sound that you just, you know, makes you want to drift away to just somewhere, you know, peaceful and special, but while still having that edge that they, you know, have in all of their tracks. Then following that, there's definitely more of that bluesy gospel aspects. On the next track, Everybody Knows a Little Bit of Something. There's this repeated phrase of the title over and over again, and groovy, funky, but also heavy hard rock, and combining that sort of psychedelic jangly stuff all into the instrumentals as well. You know, it's such a fun song, and it really is a crime that this band was just so heavily underrated as they were. Like, I know this is a little bit sort of, you know, it's got some experimental out there aspects to it, definitely, but this is still, you know, perfectly accessible enough, but just so perfectly constructed. I don't know how else to explain it, you know. It just is, I guess. Moving a little forward to track 6, I'll Never Be the Same. This one's got that sort of quite dramatic building vibe to it. What I like of some of their songs, it's got this really, their choice of harmony on this one, specifically around the hook, is got this sort of tension building, foreboding aspect to it, but while also feeling so, it feels so monumental and almost, dare I say, almost cinematic in a way. It really feels like the start of a journey. Again, kind of going into that sort of, their, biblical influences. It feels like a song singing for the catalyst for the start of like a hero's journey. Or maybe that's just my fantasy nerd aspect creeping in. Maybe both. Both is good. Both are good.
Both is good.
Then after that is the track Mission. So this is where the band starts to separate themselves from a lot of contemporary Christian music of the time. This is a criticism of televangelism. Don't think I really need to go into that. I think anyone with half a functioning brain cell knows that these televangelists aren't really true preachers of God. They just want their money for their private jets, don't they, really? But guilt-tripping people through religion, and I think that's also what really separates King's X apart, is that they're not point out the flaws in their own, not flaws in their own faith. It's the, criticising the aspect of the faith in their religion and how other people use them, negatively in a way. It's not just pure unquestioning worship, which is often what you get in a lot of, contemporary Christian music and that kind of stuff, but still has that, it still has that good feeling to it, that positive vibe, that using those biblical allusions and Christian aspects to really elevate the storytelling in a lot of their songs, while still keeping it in a positive but realistic light, as it were. Another great gospel inspired one in Fall on Me. Doug's vocal performance on this track in particular is just like when he sings out the title of the song in the hook, the rain don't fall on me. It's just got that such a strong, soulful voice that, from his experience in, gospel choirs. It's just one of those moments of just pure, just mastery of one's instrument that just makes you go, oh, yeah.
Oh, suit you, sir. Suit you, sir. Oh, suit you, sir.
It's like that part in, say, a guitar solo where they're hitting that just masterfully crafted guitar solo or perfectly groovy drum beat. And again, just hitting these notes with the power behind it in his voice. He has a great voice. I mean, both him and Ty have great voices, but Ty's is a little bit more kind of Beatles inspired. He's got that kind of John Lennon-esque aspect to his voice, which is certainly heard quite a lot in his What Ones Read Takes the Lead. Then following that, track 9, Pleiades. This opens up, again, just like Summerland, with this chimey, arpeggiated guitar intro, a little bit more sparse, but distinct in a way that, they're choosing notes you wouldn't exactly expect. It's a little bit out there without making it just too weird, as it were, to turn people off. It's got this, it's just a distinct thing that just hooks you in, and I've got my guitar so I can demonstrate it. Got there in the end. So yeah, it's using these notes that you don't typically, I wouldn't typically go for first. You start off with your normal drop D power chord, but going up to the second, like, okay, now I'd probably go maybe up to the third, but instead he goes to the C, it's fine, then the flat 6, so the B flat here, kind of like a B flat 6, but then he gets the flat second in there. So he's gone the major second and then the flat second at the end. And it's just that, it's a simple thing, but you don't think of it, but it just adds that extra kind of darkness, to a great song. So much like with Mission, this is another one kind of showing the less favourable side of their faith. It's in reference to Giordano Bruno, who was a philosopher, esotericist, alchemist in the basically during the Renaissance, and he was basically burned at the stake by Christian fundamentalists because of his, you know, the heathenism he was promoting. Essentially, I'm just paraphrasing what, you know, I've researched, and so kind of criticizing that, you know, that fundamentalism and not using faith to do terrible things to other people, which, I mean, as it's quite relevant because this is what I've been reading at the moment, so there's certainly a lot of some parallels in there. By the way, if you haven't actually read any of Discworld novels, please do. This is like just the best comedy fantasy series ever written. Please just give this a read if you haven't. But yeah, it's really interesting how you know, they're willing to point out how these were, you know, at the time at least, the band members were strongly Christian, but there's still aspects to at least the history of how the faith has been used in, you know, not so moral ways. But overall, the album continues exactly with just that perfectly crafted sound. I'm skipping over little things because I know I have a tendency to ramble, as I have in this video already, and the less waffle I have to edit out, the better. But the album continues on in just that same vein as basically you've heard already. Again, just perfectly crafted, psychedelic, jangly, but also heavy, groovy, dark, gospel, bluesy combination smushed together, very nice and good and nice and nice and good and good and nice. And then finally ends on Burning Down. Has this long, drawn out instrumental that just lets the album fade quietly. It holds on just for that little bit longer to, you know, it's say like, we're not done just yet. Let's just enjoy this beautiful moment together. Now, some people may say it just drags on, but I quite like that at the moment. There's certainly aspects of some of their albums where they do go a little bit hard into like the jamming side of it, but I think it works well on this track in particular because it's towards the end. It lets you really sit back and contemplate everything you've listened. It allows some breathing space. And aside from all of that, it's just a really well-crafted, beautiful instrumental. You know, it is. I really want to give this band just the due credit they deserve. Amazing music, amazingly crafted. And if you haven't heard of them, do give them a listen. If anything I've said about them in these videos piques your interest. They certainly are dynamic and their sound has evolved over the years, which we'll go into in the later videos. But yeah, that's part one done, and I'll see you next week for the next one, the next album, a little mystery, so you can guess what it is. Unless it's already out, then you can just look at it. So yeah, but anyway, I'll see you then.